Chapter 13. There are many ways to do it, but mostly it's personal preference. The hard part wasn't the fire. After all, a fire really isn't that hard to get going, especially with a can of kerosene. The hard part was making sure the people you wanted in the house were actually in the house. It's a complete waste of a good fire if there's nobody inside. He didn't particularly like that part of it, the part where he had to drag, cajole, and tie up the people. It would be so much easier if they just stayed put on their own, but here he was, rope in hand, yet again stuffing a torn piece of old shirt into a woman's mouth and tying it around the back of her head. Of course the kids were easier, because they would just cling to their mother. He didn't have to worry about them going for help, necessarily, but he was a detail-oriented person, so he cut a few more lengths of rope and made sure they were anchored securely with their mother to the one wooden pillar in the middle of the house. He had learned over the years that their little arms would sometimes slip out of the knots he would tie. At first he was frustrated by this, because every so often one would get away. But then he realized it allowed him to practice tying the knots better and tighter. He was actually quite proud of how nice his knots looked. He had never seen the ocean, but he was confident that any sailor would marvel at his proficiency with a rope. With the little ones and their mother tied up to his satisfaction, he grabbed the can of kerosene. Starting at the center of the shack, he was careful to pour without splashing. For the fire to spread efficiently, it was best if the kerosene was continuous. Splashing some here and some there was fine, but it didn't make for their satisfying whump when he threw the match. He made sure the mother and the children's clothing had soaked up enough, continued around the kitchen, and made sure to douse the upright piano. He walked backwards, carefully wetting a trail to the bedroom. He nonchalantly flung a few extra splashes onto the husband's body. The lone bullet hole through his head kept him dead still. He brought the kerosene trail all the way to the window. This was a more creative choice on his part. Most people would assume you would make the fire start at the front door, but that was a trite choice, not to mention the slight risk of being seen. With the can in hand, he jumped out the bedroom window effortlessly. He splashed the last of the kerosene on the windowsill and against the side of the house, then pulled a box of matches from his pocket. With a flourish, he lit a single match on the box. His eyes were wide with anticipation as he brought it down to the windowsill. Before the match even touched the wood, the flame jumped and chased the soaked trail with frightening speed. He pulled the match away as the sound of the fire filled his ears. The job was done. He knew not to linger long. The neighbors were a ways off across the cotton field, but once the flames got high enough and the smoke thickened, they would notice. Still, he couldn't help but step back for a moment and watch as the flames lapped out the windows at the clapboards, getting hotter and higher by the second. The muffled cries of the mother and children faded as the crackling of the fire grew. The man with a hat gently patted the thick envelope in his front pocket, then picked up his empty metal can and stepped away from the scene. Down the road a piece, he spied one of the neighbors come running out of their shack of a home in the distance. He could make out a faint yelling and arms waving as they pointed toward the flames. He angled away from the dirt path, across the back field, and into the woods, away from the neighbors. The black smoke rose high in the sky behind him.